The resurrection accounts of Jesus are some of my favorite moments to think about in Scripture. It seems now that Jesus' main mission has been completed, that he has let a little bit of his sassier side out of his personality in a way that he still manages to remain the compassionate friend and Lord. He questions his friends and disciples when he visits them after the resurrection, and they generally don't recognize him at first. And then there's this big surprise moment. And while it may be a little bit sassy, it also leads to some very powerful moments in the gospel. When I read these stories, I wonder about what it might be like to be, and what might be going through his followers' heads. In this moment in John, we see the disciples have gathered, and they appear to be lost and confused as to what comes next. They have seen Jesus since the resurrection, but are still a bit lost and don't know what they should be doing. They have heard Jesus' teachings and walked with him on his earthly journey. They now understand all of those seemingly weird things that Jesus has said about his death and resurrection were true, yet they don't seem to know what to do with that information. Peter, that good old Peter, steps up and makes a decision. He is going fishing. They decide that this is a good idea, and several of the disciples follow him. This decision makes logical sense. They have been Jesus' followers, but hadn't yet known what it was to lead without him. So they go to what they know. The disciples have been through it during the last portion of our narrative: fear, denial, Jesus' death and resurrection. Their whole world has been turned upside down, and I can only imagine just how overwhelmed they are feeling. I find it relatable that they go to what they know, fishing. For me, what I know would not have been fishing. I personally could never get past putting my little friend the worm on the hook to be eaten. I do know the desire to fall back into something familiar when I am overwhelmed. Our bodies seem to be craving putting the muscle memory to use and having familiar sights and sounds and smells surround us. In those moments, we can find a sense of calm and peace when the world seems to be falling apart around us. Jesus did not show up in this moment full of judgment, that they weren't doing what he had taught them to do. He went to where they were and did the comforting thing: feed them. Until Jesus arrives on the scene, they haven't been having much luck with their fishing. Then Jesus appears, and there is an abundance of fish. I have to wonder what they were thinking in the moments leading up to this big reveal. They see a man that they do not recognize standing on the beach, who tells them to throw their nets over the other side of the boat. They have been at this for hours, and I'm sure part of what they were thinking had to be, if there were fish to be caught, we would have already caught them. Do they figure, why not? We've got nothing to lose. Nothing else has worked, so let's try it. Are they trying to indulge this stranger so that he will leave them alone and allow them to go back to their peace and their comfort? Whenever they were thinking, it becomes clear just who this stranger was, as suddenly their nets are laden with fish, and yet they still do not break. As soon as they recognize him, the mood changes on the boat. It becomes jubilant, and they spring into action, preparing the catch and the boat to return to the shore. Peter's excitement can't be contained for that long to make it back to shore, and he leaps from the boat. They have been lost and confused, searching for what they were to do next, that now that Jesus is gone, but not gone. In their search, Jesus shows up and not only shows them a path, he shows them the path. The last meal that this group has shared ended with a good bit of trauma, with betrayal, denial, crucifixion, and resurrection. This breakfast that Jesus offers them seems to be another communion with bread and fish. Jesus is feeding them once again in an intimate moment, gathered around together. I wonder if this moment takes them back to Jesus' miracles and lessons. Are they thinking of the feeding of the 5,000? Or is Jesus telling them that he is the bread of life? Are they remembering these moments the way that scholars today parse things together? Or are they simply so full of joy to have another chance to sit with their friend and Lord, they cannot imagine anything beyond this time and place? Whatever they were thinking, it seems they had a joyful, companionable time together over the meal. I imagine them there, sitting there, gathered around the fire on the beach, laughing and chatting. But in typical Jesus fashion, Jesus does not leave it there, though. He has appeared to them, perhaps with the purpose of showing them that he is resurrected several times before, as we hear this was the third time. Now it is time for them to remember what their mission is and what the bigger picture was. We hear Jesus get down to business when they had finished breakfast. Often, people will offer this coming conversation as a redemption story for Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times, as had been predicted by Jesus. The conversation is not very comfortable for Peter, especially since it included a prediction of his death and resulted in him being considered the leader of the group moving forward. Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me more than these?" And Peter responds, "Yes, you know that I love you." Jesus responds, "Feed my lambs." Then again, he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" Peter again, "Yes, you know I love you." Now Jesus says, "Tend my sheep." Then the question is asked a 3rd time, "Do you love me?" We hear that Peter is feeling hurt, that it seems that Jesus doesn't believe him when he says that he loves him. And Peter responds, "You know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus now challenges him, "Feed my sheep." Earlier in the book of John, we have heard Jesus say that I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Holding these 2 passages together, it seems that Jesus is commissioning once again his disciples to go out into the world to continue that mission that he was on during his life. Jesus is making the connection that if Peter truly loves him, then he has to feed and tend Jesus' sheep. We have heard many other stories in the gospel that point to this message. If we love God, then it will turn outward. We are to love God with all of our heart, our soul, and our mind. And then we are to love our neighbors as ourselves. Jesus ends their time together by saying, "Follow me." 2 simple words that seem to carry the weight of the world in them. We know that Peter does go and follow what Jesus taught him, spreading the good news of Jesus' teaching and resurrection. Peter's story has given us many lessons, and I think this story points to one of the most important ones. Peter has denied Jesus in a pivotal moment. If this was a story of humanity, we would expect to hear that this was the end of Peter's story. He would be cast aside. And this is a story of Jesus. This moment reminds us that there is something far more important far bigger than Peter's denial. And that bigger and more important thing is the grace and love that abounds from Jesus. Peter's story does not end with him being cast out and rejected. Instead, Jesus continues to engage with and trust in Peter and the ministry that he was going to have. Jesus meets Peter where he is and coaxes him back onto the path that was set out for him. He shows that even in moments of fear, denial, and selfishness, that the story doesn't end there. Even in one of the worst moments of Peter's life, Jesus is there loving him. This good news for Peter is good news for us too. Even in the times when we are most overwhelmed in life and cannot figure out what is next, Jesus meets us there. The world and our lives may seem dark, but as we heard in John 1, the light of the world has come into the world. Times of confusion, fear, and pain can pull us into ourselves, but that light is in the world, and the grace that we are continually offered is bigger than us. We can feel alone and cut off, wanting nothing more than to go off to what we know and find comfort in the familiar. Jesus is in that moment with us. I think that he would probably understand that need and desire to go off and have a moment of peace, as he often went away and had moments of quiet and prayer. That isn't where the message and call for us ends, though. Jesus, in that moment, moves us towards a deeper relationship with God and a life of discipleship. We do not have to be perfect or have it perfectly together all the time. The times where we are feeling shame in our lives, those shut us down and close us off from growth and the mission that we are called to. The love that God, through Jesus, has for us is so much bigger than our shame and our feelings of imperfection and failure. The challenge to Peter is a challenge to us. The good news for Peter is the good news for us. We are not called to live in those solitary, shame-filled lives that are completely closed off from everybody else. We are called to care for Jesus' sheep, our neighbors. Just like that abundance of fish that were caught in the net, the abundance of God's love reaches out to us, offering us grace upon grace, setting us free to set out and follow.